Hello, ladies and gents. This is Jayme Blasiman, the host of the Femcanic Garage podcast. Welcome to the 5-part series of the dirty little secrets in the automotive and skilled trades industries. This blog series is brought to you by Chasidy Rae Sisk Writing and Communication and Femcanic Garage. We have interviewed industry experts on topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're excited to share their knowledge and experience with all of you. Now let's get started. This week, we are exploring issues related to sexual harassment. We have decided to interview 2 industry experts on this topic. This interview is with Dana Rapoport, the Chief of Diversity and Inclusion at TechForce Foundation. There, she promotes DE&I within the skilled trades industries through her work with students and young technicians. Dana shares her thoughts on how we can achieve a better, more equitable future for all technicians by eliminating harassment in the workplace. Now let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and we have Dana in the hot seat today. Dana, thanks for joining us for this, dare I say, taboo topic in our industry.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I've shared this with many of our guests, something Chaz and I have wanted to do, but we weren't sure how it would be received, our invites would be received, given the fact that we're talking about some topics that, quite honestly, a lot of people don't want to talk about in our industry or are afraid to talk about. And the only way to get rid of darkness is to shine some light on it. So that's what we're going to be doing. And you have graciously accepted the probably most difficult topic, and that is sexual harassment we're going to be talking about today. No one wants to talk about that, but it doesn't have to be, I don't want to say, maybe this isn't the right way to say it, overly heavy or uh, it's this very serious topic, but there are ways to talk about this and educate in such a way that keeps people open to receiving different ideas and how to handle things. And that's what I mean by sometimes we need to take a step back and have a discussion in such a way that allows the space for people to really hear the message versus creating and having a conversation that creates defensiveness. And it's a delicate balance and a tightrope to walk around this. And I cannot think of a better person than you to have a discussion like this. So why don't we jump right into this? The bio indicated your background, and you've had an opportunity to interview a lot of women for the program Women Tech Rocks. Did I say that right? Did I get them backwards? I feel like I have the words reversed.
No, it's Women Techs Rock.
Okay, so I was right. Women Techs Rock,
Yep.
and I'm like, gosh, am I questioning myself there? So you've had an opportunity to have some very candid conversations with many women, different, similar industries but different. Automotive's one of them. I know skilled trades falls into that as well. But I also know that you have shared both with Chaz and I that some of these women have shared stories of sexual harassment with you. And I think when we're in a position like this to get this type of feedback from multiple women, you start to see themes and trends, right? And I imagine, I'm being kind of presumptuous here, but I imagine you start to see themes, excuse me, around what women would hope for, right? And how to eliminate these types of feelings or interactions where there's an education standpoint and it's truly coming from a women's perspective. Could you share some of kind of the experiences and feedback that you've received from a lot of these women?
Absolutely. So let's start by saying what it was that I was trying to do. So there's some context to it. So this was for a project with TechForce Foundation, which helps young people get into technical education and then careers as technicians in all forms of transportation. So, automotive, aviation, marine, diesel, whatever it is that moves people and things, we get involved with. And we are really exist as a nonprofit to go ahead and try and get attention and awareness created for this as a career to try and affect the severe shortage of technicians out there. So when you start to look at the problem about the shortage, you start to recognize the difference in the demographics. So one of the most obvious differences is the fact that between 2 and 2.5% of the employed technician space are men. And that leaves this huge, I'm sorry, 2 to 2.5% are women. And that leaves this huge disparity, right, between men and women, even though 52% of the population are uh, women. So we took Women Techs Rock and we said, let's create a way for women to share their stories. And by sharing their stories, they would inspire other women. So in doing that, I really didn't have a preconception necessarily personally about what I would hear. I assumed I might hear some amount of difficulty. I assumed I would hear um, some struggles, and I assumed I would hear a few people that would sort of just were enlightened and said, "This is what I want to do," and they went and they did it. But I was very surprised because so many of their stories had heartache in it. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Some are coming from abuse. Some are coming from um, drug environments, some were, teenage pregnancies, lots of different hurdles along the way. And you're right, Jayme, patterns emerged rather quickly. And one of the patterns that emerged was this discussion of sexual harassment. And what became clear is that there's, I'm not here to define what sexual harassment is. I'm just here to sort of share those insights. And what became clear is that the younger the woman who was experiencing it was very different than it would have been for me in my era. So I will happily admit I'm a healthy 55. And so what I experienced younger and in their age, I didn't necessarily categorize or think about in terms of sexual harassment. Whereas today, many of these younger girls, it's for them is that someone has crossed their personal line.
Dana, can you give just to kind of paint a picture? Can you give like an example of when you refer to in my era, this would be considered sexual harassment versus this is not considered sexual harassment based, and we
Sure.
all know this is opinion based, right? We can create definitions till we're blue in the face. We don't, no one has this figured out, right?
No, and as much as you might look for some sort of legal definition, when you're in a situation and you're dealing with something and it's personal and you feel that you've been wronged or slighted, if in that moment for you that's your line of sexual harassment or discrimination, then you have to learn how to deal with that. So I am no different than any other woman that was out there in the workforce. I was the only woman. I was certainly the only female executive, and I had to fight for my place at times. And I had to put up with the boys' club mentality, and I had to put up with a lot of patting on the head and, oh, you're just a sweet little girl sort of feeling. And I know I can see Chaz's face going, yeah, I've been there, right? And at the time, I think you kind of just endure it. I mean, this was in the 80s and 90s. You sort of endure it and you just know you're going to work. I knew I was going to work hard to overcome that thinking so that they knew that I wasn't just capable, but a force to be reckoned with. But I had to make that personal choice to be that way. Whereas a lot of young girls just want to be recognized for the fabulous work that they do. So, in the case of a technician, many of these women were saying, I just want them to say, I'm a great tech and I do great things and I know my stuff. I don't need them to put the caveat in there that says, I do great stuff and I'm a tech. And oh, by the way, you're all that and a woman, so they don't really look at it like I should stand out because I'm a woman. I want to fit in because I'm a good tech, is where they look at it. So historically, it's kind of shifted, because before you know, older female techs would tell you that they put up with a lot of that, let me pat you on the head, you're a sweet little girl kind of attitude, being patted on the behind, the random let me walk by you and just randomly rub your neck, these kind of gestures, which you don't see very much anymore because we've been ingrained that those things are taboo now and you don't do them.
But it was very, I think what I'm hearing you say is, 20, 30 years ago, that was not uncommon. And
Not
that wasn't
uncommon.
anything that would raise a brow, so to speak.
It would take a lot more to raise the brow. And it would take a lot more, by the way, to move towards some type of action, right? I mean, it had to have been much more aggressive
And by
for it
action,
to
you mean
even
like corrective action for the
corrective
person
action.
doing
So
it? Or
to go to HR, to seek a legal opinion, whatever action you needed to take. And I'm not saying that it was like this for all women. But that was my experience.
yeah, yeah. Now, of
Right. And I put up with my fair share, believe me. And it took a long time. And then all of a sudden one day you're like, well, I'm now the CEO. So
you,
they don't have a choice.
yeah,
They have no choice. They're going to have to deal with me. I have proven myself worthy many times, or I wouldn't be where I am at.
yeah, for sure. Now, through your own personal experiences and through, interviewing multiple women in the industry, what theme have some of both yourself and the women that you've interviewed ever indicated, hey, here are some basic things that you just shouldn't do, right? Because there's this whole conversation around sexual harassment where men feel like they're walking on eggshells. They're, I can't be alone with any coworker. You know what? I'm just scared, so I'm not going to hire any women. Or I'm just scared, so I'm not going to invite her out to have lunch with me and the guys because I don't want to offend her, or, because there's a lot of that going on. And I'm not saying some of it's not warranted, right? It's warranted in the sense that there is more awareness around it, right? But the next step in all of this is just educate yourself, right? And
Yeah.
everyone wants a clear definition. Do this, don't do that. I, I it frustrates me when I hear that because we're totally discounting someone's relationship, right? I
Mhm.
have uh friendships with guys where we joke around way more extreme than some of my other guy friends, right? And I think we totally discount that where it's just we want to make it so black and white, and it's not.
And we can't.
We can't.
And I honestly think we shouldn't,
I agree.
because some of this has to do with, um, our personal ability to determine what is correct action, what is
What our
fair and
boundaries
equal,
are.
what is right, right. What are my boundaries? What are your boundaries? And some of that has to be explored to find that. But I would also tell you, as much as these women shared, which for me was a pretty deep education, it's the employer that mattered in the equation. It was the employer and how the employer responded and set expectations and culture in the team that made all the difference for most of these women. And on top of that, I was really impressed because there were a lot of these ladies that would say, you know what? the culture just wasn't supportive for me. They weren't good to me. They didn't know how to deal with me. I mean, there are women that showed up for the first day of work and there's no women's locker room. They had to wear men's uniforms, right? Because that doesn't exist for women in that industry. And so instead of saying, and trying to fight everything, these women just said, you know what, I'm going to go find a place that has a culture that's going to support me and allow me to grow. And so much of it really depended on the employer. And when they found that employer who really set that stage for a good work environment, many of these women thrive and they go to great success, and they've traveled far and wide.
And I want to highlight that last point you just made. They travel high and wide, far and wide, right?
Yep.
And that's something that I think men take for granted. It's not a stretch for, you live in a somewhat smaller town and there's 3 shops.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a female and this is an industry you love and this is something that you really want to do, and none of those 3 shops are conducive to taking the female's perspective into consideration
Mm-hmm.
or her experience, they're forced to move.
They are, and I want to note that they aren't afraid to,
That's a great point.
right? They're rather fearless because they just know that they have a certain level of confidence in their skill. And most importantly, many, if not all of them, are very passionate about what they're doing, right? And during the interviews, we asked every woman, what would you tell your younger you? Based on everything you've been through that you now know and things that you've learned, what would you tell your younger you? And many of them said that I would tell my younger self to find what I'm passionate about. And many of them were sort of disappointed that they didn't recognize that they could even have a passion for this when they were 16, 17, 18 and making career choices. So many of these women are very passionate. And so because they're passionate, they're also not willing to just give up and walk away if there is a harassment situation or discrimination or whatever that challenge is. They're looking for ways to make themselves, to personally grow and achieve what they want to achieve, even if that means, well, I have to go around this. I've got to go over it. I've got to go through it,
Got to move
So
across the country or 5 hours
right. And
away
they
or
do it. They do it. They do it. We have many stories of women who found that there was a really good positive company culture, so that if they found themselves in an odd and uncomfortable situation, these organizations have set up mechanisms that would help them address those uncomfortable situations. Like they have these mentors, they have advisory councils that they can go to before it even escalates to something of an HR level, so that they're able to learn how to cope, manage, and address it in a responsible way before it becomes something that they take action on, that they really, that really involves big commitment of emotional energy.
financial, emotional,
Yep.
psychological, all of it. Yeah,
Yep.
for sure. What
Yep.
did you hear from women who are like, when I hear those types of things, I think of a bigger company, right? A
Hmm.
smaller mom and pop, the HR department is potentially the mechanic that's working in the bay next to you, right?
Hmm.
The owner of it. What kind of ideas and I guess kind of stories have women shared around that?
When I talk to someone who's working a mom and pop, there's almost no middle ground. It's either they loved it and they're still there and they're thriving, or it wasn't for me. It's not the culture I needed. There was not enough opportunity. I couldn't grow, et cetera, et cetera. But so it's not just about, okay, I might be facing something of a sexual harassment situation, but for a lot of the mom and pops, they weren't able to provide things like additional training and things that would help advance themselves, right? So that was a challenge. They said, I want to advance, I want to grow, I want to do more. Maybe I want to own my own shop. So there's that side of it. But many of them will tell you that if in a smaller shop, if a situation arose where they were feeling uncomfortable, and again, we're not going to define what that is because that's their boundary. Um, they're feeling uncomfortable or harassed or discriminated or whatever that is, that they couldn't take it to anybody because there was no formal system or, as you said, when you opened up this opportunity that it's taboo, it's I can't go there because I'll be marked, right? That's a huge problem when it comes to, I feel like you've crossed my personal line, and if I speak up, I'm marked somehow, and now I'm not going to advance, and they're going to keep me doing, you know, lube and oil, and that's it, and I'm never going to advance. They fear repercussion in some way. Now, that's not different necessarily in a bigger organization with many shops and lots of systems and things behind it, right? That's no different. They fear that same retribution, or that they're marked somehow, and that's why it does become taboo, more taboo in some places and less in others, right? Because in some, they've created the mechanism where I can stand up for myself and I can say, I feel like you've crossed my line, and here's, what I'm going to do, or here's what I need to do, or whatever that action is. And then you have the other ones that are like, I can't speak up because if I speak up, I might as well just quit and leave,
And that's
right?
probably, people listening to this, that is probably the biggest deterrent from see something, say something,
Right.
particularly from women. Now, I can't speak from a male perspective, obviously, but I often wonder, you know, why more men don't say something, right? It is way more loaded, and I will say that it is way more loaded for a woman to speak up and say something like that because of all the examples you just, concerns you shared, Dana. But it's just unfortunately where the industry's at, and not just the industry, society. Women are emotional. Why are you taking everything so personally? You're so sensitive. And it's like, well, we're afraid of the scarlet letter, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Being blackballed and all of these things where I often wonder, do men not speak up to stand up for something that's obviously, that wasn't cool, because they're afraid of the same thing? Is it equally
There's a
a
story that one of the a tech shared with me recently, and I'll anonymize it so that you can hear it. But
please?
she was a tech in her second year at let's say, a family owned business, but they had multiple locations, but still family owned, so not huge. And when she joined, she was definitely treated like, okay, little girl, go over there, do oil changes. And she did oil changes for in almost her entire first year. And she was miserable. She wasn't doing anything, like, this is nothing. If I wanted this job, I would have asked for this role. I came here to be a tech. She then said something to the owner slash manager, because they wear that hat. They wear both hats. And this manager said, well, when it's right for you, it'll be right for you. It's not right for you. The service manager thinks you're not ready. And she said, what if I could prove to you that I'm ready? And he said, I don't know, take it up with the service manager and then we'll talk. And she said, okay, I have your permission to do that, right? Yes. She went to the service manager. She told the service manager about her conversation with the owner. And the service manager said, how are you going to prove it to me? And she said, I will take, first, we're going to do a written test, me against your best male tech, because she was the only female. And then give us a challenge, give us something to repair. So she aced the written test, and the male tech didn't. I mean, I think she said he passed, but he didn't ace it. She got it 100% spot on. And then this challenge came where they had to fix something, and she fixed it. She did it correctly, but so did he. And the service manager said, "This, you know what? You've proven yourself." And she was moved up into her own bay and out of, right? She's so angry that she had to do that to prove herself, because who else had to go through that? No one, right? No one. She actually had to stand up for herself and say, I will prove to you I can do this. She felt that she was willing to put it out there. And if they crossed the line, or if they're right, she was like, you know what do I have to lose? And the result was that she became so sort of, she impressed, let's say it that way, this service manager so much, he became sort of her biggest fan, mentor, and supporter. Right. And, she's now been sent to get additional training. She's advancing much faster than before. But the fact is that she had to remove some sort of preconceived filter in this service manager's mind. And that was tough. That was really tough. So, but she did it. And she said, I took the risk to remove that preconception that this person had, because he'd never hired a woman before. He had no knowledge. And so he just thought I couldn't do it, and was, hiring to show the big boss, yeah, I hired Diversify. I'll hire a woman, sure. And I think her outcome really surprised me, because many other women would not do it, wouldn't do it, wouldn't risk it, would not risk it. But many other women would have walked away and found another job too.
Yeah, and I've heard that multiple times, where the only option left for some women when they've tried going to, air quotes, HR, whatever that may be, in various situations, is to leave the company or leave the industry.
And this woman, I want to say that one of the things that really impressed me when we were talking is that yes, she was willing to risk it all in her mind, but in her mind also, what's the risk? I have nothing to lose, right? I could go find another job just tomorrow just because these people are jerks, or I could try, prove it, and move on. She had a choice, but she made the choice, right? She made, she saw the opportunity to have choice. And I think a lot of other women feel like they don't have a choice. They just have to leave, because there is no choice, because I'm fighting the establishment, right? I hate to say it like that, but I'm fighting this bias. I'm fighting years of thinking and generations.
And she's fighting just to be herself. Like it's like, I have to fight so hard just because I'm female.
And she said at the very end of our conversation, she said, I wasn't really fighting for anything other than what was owed to me, which is true in the sense that she said, what's owed to me is a fair chance at my work, like anybody else.
And that's not unreasonable.
It's not unreasonable.
But and I would add something, Dana, real quick. In the context of our topic in sexual harassment, is that, yes, she's owed that. And I want to add something to that. Not only the fair shake at doing her job and her work, but feeling safe in doing so. Right? And I think that's probably one of the simplest things around sexual harassment. And when I think about sexual harassment, I think about my daughter. She's 14 years old. She is a child in a grown woman's body, literally. And I ask myself, would how would I feel as a parent, and would I feel that my child is safe there? Right? And if I'm being honest, the majority of places in our industry, I I would not feel safe for my daughter to be in those environments.
Yeah. I apologize.
That's okay. We
That's
all have
actually right
pets.
there. That's a battle between men and women out in the hallway. That's boy versus girl right there. They personify that daily for me, my puppies. So, you bring up something really important. However, it was this tech, it was up to her to determine if she was crossing a line or not. And she said, I'm not crossing a line. They crossed a line. And before all of this, she had endured a fair amount of difficulty heckling. Um, she had done an oil change on someone's car, uh, and the owner of that car found out and was very upset and went to the general manager to complain that they had some young woman, some young girl is how he said it, to work on my car. I don't want a girl working on my car. I want a man. And it was the general manager who stood up for her and said, nope, if you don't want that, then you need to find service elsewhere.
Good for them.
Right. So she had an inkling that they would stand up for her, but she just needed to get past this one more hurdle, which was that there was one more person that was sort of standing in her way. And she decided that this was the best way to take it on. It's not the first time I've heard that discussion, by the way. I heard repeatedly how many of these women techs had customers who didn't want them to work on their cars. And it made all the difference in the world that their organization or their service manager stood up and said, it's either her because, she's good, she's qualified, whatever, or, you have to take your service elsewhere.
And I want to emphasize this because I think the point that you brought up, Dana, is so critical. And I'm summarizing the message that I'm interpreting in what you're sharing. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, and Chaz, jump in if you think I'm summarizing this inaccurately. But when I'm listening to you, Dana, and if I were to summarize this, it's one, the company or the shop that they work for makes all the world of a difference. It's not necessarily a specific employee, right? It's about, for the women that you've interviewed and you've talked to, about how the company handles it, right? How are they going to handle it? And can I trust that the company's going to handle this and keep my best interests and me safe, feeling safe?
So many of these women would remind me pretty often that they knew that the only thing that they could control in these situations was themselves and how they chose to respond or react, and that they felt that they would be further judged and maybe even more further it would lead to worse treatment. But they felt that they knew that that's all they really had, because that's all any of us really have is what we have on on our own ourselves. If a woman in these situations had a employer that she knew from the get-go had her back, these women performed better and differently than women who weren't so sure or didn't have that clarity or understanding.
Or support. That
Right?
confidence in their support.
But let's go back to the notion of safety. I never did hear that there was a woman who felt that her safety was on the line in terms of any physical threat or anything like that. I did hear a lot of things about emotional safety. And I did hear a lot of things about, well, they're trying to push me down, or, I heard a lot of that sort of emotional struggle, which to a lot of women was emotional safety. That's, a core thing for them.
I've heard, I would agree with you, Dana. That is the majority of what I heard as well. However, there were I've interviewed about 100 women now. There are a handful where they did experience physical threats.
Yep.
And
I
that
don't
does
want to
happen.
deny that does, it happens and it's out there and I get it. But I didn't feel like it was so prevalent either.
Yeah.
That, that women are in danger and they're walking into dangerous situations every time they take on this job. Not at all. I never really got that sense. But I did get a lot of, so I asked the women some of the same questions over and over again. And I asked these women, what's your personal mantra? So what do you say to yourself when you're in a situation or when you're, facing a challenge you can't quite figure out or solve? And that's it. That was the question. So I didn't tell them, okay, when you're facing difficulty because you're being told, well, because you're a woman, you're going to do this.
Or sexual harassment.
Right. I just put it out there and said, what do you say when you're in a challenge? And I was just so pleasantly surprised. First of all, I can't believe how many women have sort of a go-to personal mantra or phrase or something that they say to themselves. I think that's pretty powerful and makes us as women really unique in this field. Because a lot of the women said, a guy's personal mantra is usually a curse word. And maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not going to be the one to say that. But these women had really great, powerful statements that they would say to themselves. Things like, step away, take a breath, come back. And that doesn't sound like a mantra, but many of these women said, I would say that to myself 10 times a day. And 10 times a day, I would step outside and take a breath and come back and revisit it. There was a lot of follow your passion. And so because of that, a lot of the women would say to themselves things like, this means something to you. And because it means something to you, it means something to the owner of this vehicle. And therefore, you're going to take your time and figure this out. So women actually look at the job from the minute they enter it kind of differently, because they don't look at just the vehicle, the engine, the part, the problem. They were also saying, but this vehicle is going to drive a family. This vehicle is going to get a mom to her job. Right? They looked at it differently. Like, I have an aviation technician who I think is just a tremendous, I don't know if I say the word, but she's a tremendous badass, because she just said, look, this plane is carrying lots of other people's loved ones. So I better make sure I'm passionate about what I do and I'm doing it really well. I don't look at the engine of the car or the plane or the bus or whatever it is, because you know what? The engine doesn't care if I'm a man or a woman. It does not care. All it cares about is whether or not I can repair it and do a good job. The engine's not going to harass me. The engine's not going to treat me poorly. It may make my challenge hard, but I'm here for that. I'm not here for the rest of it.
I see Chaz leaning in. I know what that means.
And let it go. Let it go. Come on, Chaz. Say it.
No, I was just enjoying the story, and I love the badasses in this industry. Like, it's just amazing the differences between men and women and the way that we interact even with inanimate objects.
Absolutely. And you know what? I got to say, I still don't really look at this as sort of men versus women. I'm not I don't really think that
Yeah.
makes any sense
I
at all.
agree.
I've never really thought that way. And the women don't look at it that way either, right? They're in it because they
Love it.
love what they do. So I have such a sense of appreciation for these women, though. They are amazing what they can do. We interviewed a woman who is the chief technician on ski chairlifts, and she has to climb 100-foot plus poles to work on these. Right? Okay, I'm not doing it. Are you guys going to do
Terrifying.
it?
No,
Nope.
Nope.
not my
Not for
bag.
me.
Good.
Right? We have another lady who works on cranes because we do a lot of technicians for heavy equipment, and she works on cranes, and she's got to, if a crane isn't working and it's stuck, they have to climb the the crane hundreds of feet,
No.
and she's just like, yeah, I do it every day, and I enjoy the view. Sometimes I take a minute and I stop and I'll pull out my phone and take a picture. Immediately I was like, what if you drop your phone?
I'm
But
like, if I'm stopping hundreds of feet up,
no,
it's because I'm crying.
or I'm
Yeah.
throwing up. Either
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah,
And
for sure.
sorry about you down below, but some of these women, they're absolutely fearless. And really, I don't know if that makes them different or badass or what. I mean, if it was a man, I'd still say a man's pretty badass for doing that too, because
For sure.
I'm a sissy and I'm not climbing a 100-foot pole. No way, no how.
I am not as well. And
Right? Yeah, I'm not afraid to admit that either. So, this has been a tremendous eye-opening experience because these women really they just put themselves out there. They go forward. They may face those challenges, but they don't let it stop them. And one more thing, it's not that it's taboo to talk about. It's all of these preconceptions that have been built in. And I had one woman ask, so I will ask this and see what you guys think is, okay, well, wait a second. It's taboo and it's been built in and it's this preconception. But what happens when all those people that are there now with those preconceptions have aged out of those jobs? And now you have this next generation. Are we in the middle of a big, huge transition where this next generation of people coming in is going to be more open and doesn't have those preconceptions? And how many more years until that transition is complete is not something I could answer.
it's an
But I
interesting
understood why she
question.
was asking.
It's an interesting question for sure. And I don't think it's about age. I think that may be a small part of it, but I think it has more to do with culture.
I agree.
For cultural changes to happen, I mean, it takes time, right?
Yeah.
And you brought up and shared so many great nuggets of information, Dana. And I guess I kind of want to just summarize it, and I started to a little bit, but I think the biggest key here is find your tribe, right? A support structure, and Women Tech Rocks. What you're creating there and interviewing and creating what TechForce is creating is a tribe, right? In the industry. It's creating support and education in many ways, and it's giving a platform. I think that's one of the biggest keys. And one of the other things that really resonated with me and stuff that in a lot of the content that you shared today is that it's not easy by any stretch, but it's about kind of that introspection where you have to figure out what your boundaries are, your personal boundaries are, and communicate those boundaries. And every one of these women, it's not that they weren't afraid, right? Courage is not the absence of fear. It's being afraid, but doing it anyway and staying true to your gut in your story that you shared, where she's like, yeah, it sucks that I had to do that, right? I had to prove myself. And she had those same fears. But
She did.
at the same time, it's a matter of facing those fears and moving forward. And maybe it doesn't work out exactly the way that you want.
Right.
But that's where it becomes not cookie cutter, and that you have to really look and make that determination for yourself. Now, as far as men, right, and men figuring out how to navigate this, that's another key thing here. And I think the reality is, and what I've heard you say throughout your message here, is that there isn't a cookie cutter answer. There isn't a cookie cutter definition. As much as court systems and everywhere else wants to come up with a definition, there isn't a real definition. It's about relationships and respect.
Right. There is a line, everyone has one. And by having open dialogue, I think we discover where our boundaries are. I also want to just say that one of the big things you said is to find your tribe. One of the things that, and the big reason for doing what we're doing at TechForce with Women Techs Rock was trying to set a way for other young girls to see themselves in these women, because
Right.
they don't know what's possible for a career unless they can sort of imagine themselves doing what they see. So many of these women are very inspirational to some of these younger girls who are thinking that this might be something of interest, but so and so says I shouldn't do it. It's for boys, those kind of things. And then I also want to mention that you talked about um, you know it isn't just finding the tribe. It's about finding resources, and it's about finding people that will support you, and they come in different shape, size, color, sexual orientation, different viewpoints, backgrounds, you name it. And so, in order to really address some of these things that you're talking about in your piece, we all have to kind of be open to talking to people of all those different backgrounds to really find our way forward. And it's a big part of these women and sharing their stories. They're showing how different they are and their backgrounds and their diversity and the things they've overcome.
So beautifully put. And I think that is probably the most beautiful way to wrap up this interview and what you just said, Dana. And I want to personally thank you. I know Chaz will pop on here as well. Thank you for taking the chance and having a conversation with us about a sensitive topic that everyone is trying to figure out and understand and work on and work through to get on the other side of this and really shine some light so we can put some of this craziness behind us. So thank you for taking a chance. Thank you for joining Chaz and I. And thank you for being a part of this Women's History Month project.
Thank you. And let's continue to do it.
And thank you for highlighting these awesome women that are doing amazing things, because we definitely need more of that. Representation is so important.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. By being open to learning more about these topics, you are fueling a movement that creates a safer and more inclusive environment for women in our industry. And for that, we thank you. It's up to all of us to keep this conversation alive. The only way to rid the industry of the darkness is to shine light on it. The entire 5-part blog series of the dirty little secrets of the automotive and skilled trades industries can be found on ChasidyRaeSisk.com and Femcanic.com. Until next time, my friends.